Today we're going to talk about oil clearances on your crank. There's two ways to check this. You can use micrometers to measure the crank, and then you have to put your caps on and use a bore gauge, which has a little tiny button on the end of it that moves the micrometer. See it move? Okay. When you're doing the bore gauge, you must, number one, put the bearings in and crank them down, or torque them down to specifications, and then measure it. The idea is to subtract the crank journal size to the bore size. And I'm also going to, after I go through this, I'm going to show how to use plastic gauge. Now, I'm not going to open it until I get ready to use it, but using a micrometer and a bore gauge is a little bit more accurate if you're building a high torque, high RPM engine. You need to know exactly where you're at. For just a street machine, you have a little looser tolerances. You're not putting so much pressure on it, and plastic gauge will do wonderfully for that. And you can also do this if you've got an engine that's unknown. You can knock the caps off, take the crank out, and use plastic gauge to see where you are currently before you ever have any machine work done or have thought about machine work. Many times you can just maybe have the crank polished, micro polished, and put standard bearings in, or maybe one over bearings in, and do just wonderfully. We're going to see where we're at. I have made a stand out of wood. You can see it over here. Has a little, come on, get in there. Has a little cradle built in here, and then I've used just a piece of chipboard to go on top of this to where it doesn't have a chance of scarring the crank, and it's high enough to where I can turn the crank and check it really well all the way around, and I'll show you more on that just in a little bit. Okay, so when we're measuring your journals, you want to be very gentle. You don't want to cock or force your micrometer in here, because you can and will scar the crank. Okay, set it in there. Find the middle where you start getting friction. Loosen it up a little bit until it passes through with just ever so light friction, but you want it to pass through. And what you're looking for here is your low spot. That's okay. Based on the measurements that I made, I should be between 2 and 3 thousandths on my oil gap. That would be wonderful. Okay, I've got the cam bearings in the bottom, and I've put oil on the bottom cam bearings, Lord have mercy, main bearings. I put oil on the bottom only, nothing on the top. Now, on your main caps on the top, you notice there's 4 little punch marks there. That's 1, 2, 3, that's number 4. So you can't get it mixed up. There's no need in numbering the block you don't have to do that. And also there's a really small arrow that goes to the front. Alright? And before we drop the crank in, don't forget to put the rear main seal in correctly. And I like to have the rear main seal where it protrudes just slightly on one side. That way the little grooves here don't line up with the seal and the block, giving you a little added protection against leaks. I hate these two main seals. There are two seal mains. Alright, I started out with the number 3 main cap, this one, and let's see, zoom in here a little bit. And you can see the plastic gauge here. There's a little gauge here. Don't get confused. There is metric on one side and inch on the other. And I'm looking for the gap that most matches what I got here. And I am like right on 0.002. Alright? So that is absolutely wonderful. Now, I put new ARP bolts in, lubed them to specs, torqued them down in 3 sequences, 25, 50, and then 70, and then broke it back loose. Now, there's no oil on the top, and I have to get rid of this plastic gauge on here and on the main cap, and then oil this surface, retorque it, and go on to the next one. And don't forget to, sometime or another, you're going to have to spin this thing around, but not right now. Do not turn the crank. One thing to note here, the very front main is going to be the last main that gets oil, and I'm actually at 3 thousandths on it. All the rest of them measure 2. So remember that. Make sure you plastic gauge the fronts. Alright? If you don't do anything else, at least do that.